Some promises are made to be broken, but others are engineered to shatter a life from the very beginning. For 19-year-old Ilara, the promise was a beautiful one, whispered to her by the only family she had left. Her aunt and uncle, their faces etched with a practiced worry, sat her down at their small wobbly kitchen table. The city outside was loud, a constant hum of traffic and ambition, but inside that apartment the silence was heavy, broken only by the drip of a leaky faucet and the gentle clinking of their spoons against ceramic mugs. They told her about an opportunity, a golden ticket, a chance to leave the grit and the struggle behind. A position in the countryside, they said, as a companion to a kind, wealthy widow who lived on a sprawling estate. They painted a picture with their words, a masterpiece of deception. They spoke of rolling green hills, of fresh air that didn't taste of exhaust fumes, of quiet days spent reading in a sun-drenched garden. "She just needs a friend, Ilara," her aunt had said, her hand covering Ilara's. It felt cold. "Someone with your spirit, your kindness." Ilara, whose life had been a series of grey, unremarkable days, saw only the vibrant colours of their story. She saw a path to independence, a way to finally stop being a burden. She had dreams, quiet ones she held close to her chest. She wanted to study botany, to understand the secret language of plants. The countryside, she thought, would be the perfect place to start. The decision was easy. The lie was too beautiful to question. A week later, her single, scuffed suitcase was packed. Her uncle arranged the transport, a beat-up sedan driven by a man who didn't say a word the entire 4-hour journey. As the concrete towers of the city dissolved into endless fields of corn and soy, Ilara's heart swelled with a nervous excitement. This was it, the first day of her real life. But as the car turned off the main highway and onto a progressively rougher dirt road, a small cold seed of doubt began to sprout. The manicured lawns and white picket fences of her imagination were replaced by overgrown weeds and rusted barbed wire. The road seemed to stretch into an unforgiving horizon, with nothing but a hazy, heat-scorched sky above. Finally, the car shuddered to a halt. In front of her was not a charming estate, but a dilapidated farmhouse with peeling paint and a sagging porch. A few barns, weathered and grim, stood behind it like silent, rotting teeth. This couldn't be it. There had to be a mistake. She turned to the driver, a question forming on her lips, but he was already getting out, pulling her suitcase from the trunk and dropping it into the thick dust. He didn't look at her. He simply got back in the car, slammed the door, and sped away, leaving her standing in a cloud of brown grit. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the distant caw of a crow. She was alone. The beautiful promise had vanished, and in its place was a terrifying, desolate reality. The dust settled, revealing not a sanctuary but a prison, and as the farmhouse door creaked open, she was about to meet the warden. The man who emerged from the shadows of the porch was the stuff of quiet nightmares. He wasn't large or physically imposing, but he carried an aura of sour cruelty that seemed to poison the air around him. He was Mr. Silas. His eyes, small and dark, scanned Ilara from head to toe, a sneer twisting his thin lips. There was no welcome in his gaze, only a cold, calculating assessment like a butcher eyeing a piece of meat. "So you're the new girl," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration of ownership. Ilara, clutching the handle of her suitcase, felt a tremor of fear run down her spine. "There's been a mistake," she stammered. "I was told I'd be a companion for a woman who lives here." Silas let out a short, barking laugh that was devoid of any humor. "Oh, you'll be a companion, all right. A companion to the dirt, the sweat, and the blisters. Your uncle didn't tell you. He sold me your contract. You're here to work off his debt." The words hit her like a physical blow. Sold. Debt. The beautiful lie her family had constructed crumbled into dust, revealing the ugly truth it was built upon. She was property. She was trapped. Silas seemed to relish the flicker of hope dying in her eyes. He gestured vaguely at the sprawling, neglected fields around them. "This is your home now. You'll work from sunup to sundown. You'll eat what I give you, and you'll sleep where I tell you. No questions, no complaints." He led her not to the main house, but to a small, grim outbuilding that might have once been a storage shed. Inside there was a simple cot with a thin, stained mattress and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. This was her room. This was her life. The despair was so total, so absolute, it felt like drowning. Over the next few days, the full weight of her new reality crushed down on her. The work was brutal, designed to break the body and the spirit, mending fences under the searing sun, hauling feed, cleaning out the filthy animal pens. Her hands, once soft, were now raw and blistered. Every muscle ached. Silas was a constant, menacing presence, his voice a whip of insults and threats, reminding her of her worthlessness, of her inescapable debt. The other workers, a handful of men with weary, defeated eyes, kept their distance, their silence a wall of fear. They knew better than to associate with Silas's new target. In this landscape of despair, however, there was one person who was different. He was a quiet man, broad-shouldered and with hands that were just as calloused as the others, but his eyes held a different light. They called him Mark. He didn't offer words of pity, which Ilara was grateful for. Instead, his kindness was a silent language. He'd leave a canteen of cool water near where she was working. When Silas berated her for bundling hay incorrectly, Mark, without a word, would later demonstrate a technique that made the work twice as easy. He never drew attention to himself, but she felt his presence as a small, defiant warmth in the suffocating cold of the farm. He watched, he observed, and in his gaze she saw not pity, but a flicker of something else, a quiet, simmering anger. She didn't know who he was or why he was there, but in a world designed to break her, this silent worker was becoming the only reason she hadn't completely shattered. Hope is a dangerous thing in a place like Silas's farm. It's a flicker of light that makes the surrounding darkness feel even deeper. For Ilara, that hope had a name: Mark. His acts of kindness were never grand or overt. They were small, almost invisible gestures woven into the fabric of their grueling days. One afternoon, as she struggled to lift a heavy sack of feed, her arms trembling with exhaustion, Mark appeared at her side. He didn't offer to do it for her. Instead, he simply adjusted her grip, shifted her stance, and said in a low, calm voice, "Bend your knees, let the ground do the work." And just like that, the weight felt manageable. He didn't linger. He just nodded and walked away, leaving Ilara with the profound feeling that she wasn't entirely alone in her struggle. Another time, Silas flew into a rage because a section of the fence was down, allowing a few animals to wander. He immediately rounded on Ilara, his face purple with fury, accusing her of negligence. As he stepped toward her, his hand raised, Mark intervened. He stepped between them, his body a solid, unmovable presence. "It was my section, Silas," he said, his voice even but firm. "The wire was rusted through. I was on my way to fix it." Silas, surprised by the direct challenge, sputtered for a moment. He glared at Mark, his authority questioned. But there was something in Mark's steady, unwavering gaze that made Silas back down. He spat on the ground, muttered a threat, and stormed off. Mark hadn't even looked at Ilara, but he had just taken a blow that was meant for her. Their bond was forged in these silent moments. It was in a shared look across the dusty yard, an acknowledgement of their shared hardship under Silas's tyrannical rule. Ilara learned to read his subtle cues. A slight nod meant, "Be careful. Silas is in a bad mood." A tool left in a specific spot was his way of telling her which task to do next to avoid the most difficult labor. He was teaching her how to survive. For Ilara, he was a mystery. He worked as hard as anyone, never complaining. But unlike the other workers, the fear that permeated the farm didn't seem to touch him in the same way. The others were broken. He was waiting. There was a strength in his silence, a purpose in his eyes that she couldn't quite decipher. This quiet alliance did not go unnoticed. Silas began to watch them, his suspicious gaze lingering whenever they were near each other. He started deliberately assigning them tasks at opposite ends of the vast property, trying to sever their silent connection. His cruelty towards Ilara intensified, as if to punish her for having found a sliver of support. He would dump her meager dinner onto the dirt, forcing her to eat from the ground. He would add hours to her workday, making her toil long after the sun had set, the darkness amplifying her sense of isolation. But his efforts only solidified their bond. Knowing Mark was somewhere on that same land, under that same moon, gave her a strange and defiant strength. His silent acts of kindness had become a lifeline, a quiet rebellion against the crushing weight of despair. Silas thought he could break them by keeping them apart, but he failed to understand one crucial thing. He wasn't just watching a farmhand. He was watching a king survey his own stolen kingdom. To the workers on the farm, he was just Mark, a quiet, capable man who kept to himself. But in another world, a world of glass towers and digital empires, he was Marcus Vance, the founder and CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech corporation. He was a titan of industry, a name whispered with reverence in boardrooms and on stock market floors, and he was utterly, profoundly exhausted. The pressure, the endless meetings, the soulless pursuit of profit margins, it had hollowed him out. He had built an empire but had lost himself in the process. So he had done the unthinkable. He had walked away. He told his board he was taking a sabbatical, handing over the daily operations to his trusted second-in-command. He didn't go to a private island or a lavish resort. He came back here to the land of his childhood. Years ago, using his immense wealth, he had started quietly buying up the farmland in the rural county where he was raised, not for development, but for preservation. His company, through a subsidiary, was now the largest landowner in the region, and the farm managed by Silas was part of his portfolio. He had come back not as a CEO, but as an anonymous worker, to feel the soil in his hands, to engage in honest physical labor, and to see if the man he used to be was still in there somewhere. He wanted to understand his investment not from a spreadsheet, but from the ground up. What he found had disturbed him deeply. He had hired Silas based on a resume that boasted efficiency and productivity. But from the moment he arrived as Mark, he saw the truth. Silas ruled through fear. He cut corners, embezzled funds, and treated his workers not as employees but as serfs. Marcus had been gathering evidence, documenting the abuses, and planning a corporate restructuring that would oust Silas and reform the entire operation. He was moving slowly, carefully, wanting to build an airtight case before he acted. He was a strategist, after all, and he knew the value of patience and timing. Then, Ilara arrived. He saw the whole sordid affair unfold. He saw the lie in her eyes curdle into terror. He saw her spirit, bright and defiant, being systematically crushed by Silas's cruelty, and it changed everything. This was no longer just a business problem, a line item of corporate malfeasance. It was a moral crisis unfolding before his very eyes. Every time he saw Silas humiliate her, a cold, precise fury built within him. His quiet acts of kindness were more than just pity. They were the first stirrings of a protector. He was the only one who had the power to stop this, and the longer he waited, the more complicit he became. His self-imposed exile was over. His retreat had become a battlefield. The game had changed from fixing a broken business model to saving a human life. He looked at his calloused hands, the hands of a worker, and knew they would soon have to wield the power of a CEO. He had come to the countryside to save himself, but now he had to save her, and in doing so he was about to unleash the full unseen power he had been holding in reserve. Marcus moved with the quiet precision of a predator. By day he was Mark, the diligent farmhand, mending fences and hauling feed. But by night, the CEO would emerge. In the privacy of his own small rented cabin a few miles from the farm, he would open a sleek encrypted laptop, and the full force of his empire would come to life. The unseen web, he commanded, stretched from this dusty rural outpost all the way to the gleaming heart of the city. His first calls were to his head of security, a formidable ex-military man named Corbin. "I want to know everything about Silas," Marcus said, his voice low and hard. "Financials, past employers, any legal issues. Dig deep. I also want to know about a family. I need to understand the debt he claims they owe." The information started to flow back within hours, painting a grim and damning picture. Silas had a history of this. He preyed on desperate families, using predatory loans to create inescapable debts, then exploiting their children as forced labor. He was a monster hiding in plain sight. Marcus's legal team, led by a sharp, relentless lawyer named Anya, began building the case. They documented every violation, from labor laws to human trafficking statutes. Marcus was no longer just planning to fire Silas. He was planning to destroy him, to ensure he could never harm anyone again. He fed his team information he gathered on the farm, overheard conversations, discrepancies in the supply logs, the fear in the other workers' eyes. Meanwhile, on the farm, Ilara clung to the hope that Mark represented. She didn't understand the source of his quiet confidence, but she felt it. It was a shield. When he was near, Silas seemed less likely to lash out. This growing connection, however, was like a red flag to a bull. Silas, whose power was built on isolation and fear, saw their silent bond as a direct threat to his control. He began to actively work to break it. "You," he would bark at Mark, "go fix the irrigation pump on the North Ridge. It'll take you all day." Then he'd turn to Ilara. "You're with me. We're clearing the lower field." He would give her the most brutal tasks when Mark was gone, doubling down on his psychological torment. "No one's coming to save you," he'd sneer, his voice dripping with venom as she struggled to pull rocks from the hard-packed earth. "That friend of yours? He's just like the rest. He'll look out for himself when it comes down to it. In this world, you are utterly alone." But his words had the opposite effect. They made her realize just how much she relied on Mark's silent support, and it made her more determined than ever not to break. She would meet Silas's gaze with a flicker of defiance in her own, a strength she didn't know she possessed, a strength he had unknowingly forged in her. Silas thought he was severing a bond. In reality, he was pulling the pin on a grenade, unaware that the quiet man he kept sending away was the only thing holding back the explosion. There is a point where cruelty overplays its hand, a point where the tormentor, blinded by his own sadism, pushes his victim one step too far. For Silas, that moment had arrived. He had grown increasingly enraged by Ilara's resilience. He expected tears, begging, a complete collapse of her will. Instead, he saw a quiet dignity, a spirit that, while bruised, refused to break. He saw the ghost of Mark's support in her eyes, and it infuriated him. He needed to extinguish that light for good. He needed to prove to her and to himself that his power was absolute. So he orchestrated a final, cruel performance. One morning he stormed out of the farmhouse, holding up a small, empty velvet pouch. It was where he kept the cash from the week's produce sales. "It's gone!" he roared, his voice echoing across the silent farm. "The money is gone!" His eyes, burning with a manufactured fury, landed directly on Ilara. The other workers immediately looked at the ground, knowing what was coming. It was a classic Silas tactic: public accusation, ultimate humiliation. "You!" he spat, pointing a trembling finger at her. "It was you. I saw you sneaking around the house last night." It was a blatant lie. She had been locked in her shed of a room, exhausted and asleep. "I didn't," she said, her voice small but steady. "I would never do that." Her denial only fueled his performance. "A thief and a liar!" he screamed, striding towards her. "You think you can come here and steal from me?" Before she could react, he grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin like talons. He dragged her across the yard, her feet stumbling in the dirt. The other workers just watched, their faces pale masks of fear. They knew the money wasn't stolen. Silas had likely hidden it himself, but they also knew the price of speaking up. He dragged her to the old, windowless smokehouse at the edge of the property, a dark, suffocating stone structure. He shoved her inside, the force of it sending her sprawling onto the cold, damp floor. "You'll stay in here until you confess and tell me where you hid my money," he snarled. "Maybe a few days in the dark will remind you of your place." The heavy wooden door slammed shut, plunging her into absolute blackness. The sound of a heavy bolt sliding into place was the most terrifying sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of hope being extinguished. She was alone, trapped in the dark, with nothing but the sound of her own ragged breathing. But on the other side of the farm, the one man Silas had tried so hard to keep away had just heard the commotion, and the time for patience, for strategy, for hiding, was officially over. The sound of the bolt sliding home echoed in Marcus's soul. He had been on his way back from the North Ridge, the job Silas had sent him on as a diversion. He saw the whole Ioway, a grotesque theater play from a distance. He saw Silas drag Ilara, saw the fear on the other workers' faces, and saw the door to the smokehouse slam shut. A cold, lethal calm washed over him. The plan, the careful legal strategy, the airtight case, it all evaporated in the fire of pure, righteous fury. This was no longer about the law, this was about justice, and justice was coming now. He started walking towards Silas, his pace measured and deliberate. Each step was heavy with unspoken intent. Silas was standing by the smokehouse, basking in his own cruelty, a smug look of triumph on his face. He saw Mark approaching and sneered. "Come to watch the show, have you?" he taunted. "Your little friend is learning a valuable lesson today." Marcus didn't slow down. He stopped just a few feet from Silas, his eyes locking onto him. The gaze was different now. The subservient, quiet farmhand was gone. In his place stood someone else, someone with an authority that was ancient and absolute. "Let her out, Silas," Marcus said. His voice was unnervingly quiet, yet it cut through the air with the sharpness of a razor. Silas laughed, a high-pitched, incredulous sound. "You're giving me orders now? You're just a hired hand, Mark, a nobody. You have no power here. I own this land, I own her, and I own you." It was the ultimate miscalculation. It was the mistake that would cost him everything. Because at that exact moment, a sound began to grow in the distance, the low hum of an engine. It grew louder, closer, until a sleek black SUV, completely out of place in this rural setting, came speeding down the dirt road, kicking up a plume of dust. It pulled to a stop just yards away. The driver's door opened, and a man in a perfectly tailored dark suit stepped out. He was holding a phone to his ear. He looked around, his eyes scanning the scene, and they fell on Marcus. "We're here, Mr. Vance," the man said, his voice crisp and professional. "The sheriff is 5 minutes out. We have everything we need." Mr. Vance. The name hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Silas's sneer froze on his face. His eyes darted from the man in the suit to the quiet farmhand standing before him. The color drained from his face, replaced by a pasty, sickly white. The smug arrogance in his eyes dissolved into pure, unadulterated terror. He was looking at Mark, but he was finally seeing Marcus Vance, the phantom owner, the man who held his entire world in the palm of his hand. He had not been tormenting a helpless girl and a lone worker. He had been poking a sleeping giant with a stick, and the giant was now awake. The mask was off. The game was over. And for a man like Silas, who built his world on the fear of others, the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. For Silas, the ground had just fallen away from beneath his feet. The man he had mocked, the man he had dismissed as a nobody, was the architect of his entire reality. Marcus Vance took a step forward, and Silas instinctively took a step back, stumbling like a man who had forgotten how to walk. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely and violently inverted. "You don't own this land, Silas," Marcus said, his voice still quiet, but now it held the chilling weight of absolute power. "You don't own these people, and you certainly don't own me. You are a guest in my house, and you have been a very, very poor one." The man in the suit, Marcus's lawyer, Anya's partner, approached and handed Marcus a thick folder. Marcus didn't open it. He just held it. "In this folder," he continued, his eyes boring into Silas, "is a detailed account of your entire operation, the embezzlement from the supply budget, the predatory loans you made to desperate families, the names of every single person you've trapped here, including Ilara. It's all there. Every crime, every violation." As he spoke, the distant siren grew louder, a mournful wail that sounded like justice itself. The other workers, who had been frozen in fear, began to look up, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning hope. They were watching their tyrant crumble. A patrol car pulled up behind the SUV, and 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies stepped out. They walked with a calm purpose, their presence confirming that this was no longer a farm dispute. This was a criminal matter. "That's him," Marcus said, nodding toward the trembling Silas. The deputies moved in. Silas looked wildly around as if searching for an escape route from a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He looked at Marcus, his face a pathetic mask of pleading. "Mr. Vance, please, it was a misunderstanding." But there was no mercy in Marcus's eyes, only a cold, hard finality. The deputies handcuffed Silas, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence. The man who had ruled with an iron fist, who had dispensed cruelty as if it were his right, was now powerless, his reign of terror over. As they led him away, Marcus turned and walked to the smokehouse. He pulled the heavy bolt back himself. The door creaked open, spilling light into the oppressive darkness within. Ilara was huddled in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked up, her eyes blinking against the sudden brightness, expecting to see the hateful face of Silas. Instead, she saw Mark, but it was a Mark she had never seen before. He was no longer just a kind farmhand. He stood there with an aura of command, of power, but his eyes held the same gentleness she had come to rely on. He extended a hand to her. "It's over, Ilara," he said softly. "You're safe now." She took his hand, and as he helped her to her feet, she stepped out of the darkness and into the beginning of a new day. He had freed her from a stone prison, but the invisible walls around her heart were still standing, and he knew that tearing those down would be the most important work of all. Freedom, when it comes after a long period of captivity, is a disorienting thing. The world feels too big, the air too thin, the future too vast. Ilara was free, but she was adrift in a sea of shock and uncertainty. Marcus understood this. He didn't bombard her with questions or decisions. His first priority was her well-being. He had her escorted not to a sterile office or a police station, but to his own private residence on the estate, a beautiful modern house hidden away in a grove of oak trees that she never knew existed. It was a world away from Silas's decaying farmhouse. Here there was light, warmth, and quiet compassion. A doctor attended to her, treating the cuts and bruises that were a map of her ordeal. A kind housekeeper brought her fresh clothes and a warm meal, speaking to her in a soft, gentle voice. Later that evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the rolling hills, Marcus came to speak with her. They sat on a wide veranda overlooking the land he now vowed to heal. He was no longer dressed as Mark the farmhand. He wore simple, clean clothes, but the air of the CEO was unmistakable. Yet, when he spoke, his voice was filled with a humble sincerity. He told her everything. He told her who he was, the CEO of a vast company who had lost his way. He explained why he had come back seeking a connection to something real, and his shame at not realizing the extent of Silas's evil sooner. "I saw what he was doing to you, Ilara," he said, his gaze direct and filled with remorse. "I was building a case, trying to do it by the book, but I waited too long. I let you suffer, and for that, I am truly sorry." His apology was the key that unlocked her own voice. She found herself talking, the words tumbling out, about her family's betrayal, her lost dreams of studying plants, the crushing fear, and the small, defiant flicker of hope that his silent acts of kindness had given her. It was in this quiet, vulnerable conversation that they truly met for the first time, not as a powerful CEO and a victim, but as two people who had found each other in the darkness. He listened to every word, his attention absolute. He promised her that his legal team was already dealing with her family's fraudulent debt, ensuring it was nullified. He promised her that Silas would face the full extent of the law. "You have nothing to fear anymore," he told her, his voice a steady anchor. "Your future is your own now. You can choose any path you want." He spoke of sending her to the best university, of giving her a job in any city she desired, of providing her with the resources to start completely new. He was offering her a blank page, a chance to write a story that was entirely her own. He offered her the world, a return to the life she thought she wanted, but what she had endured, and what she had learned, was about to lead her to a choice no one, least of all him, ever expected. In the weeks that followed, Ilara began to heal. The physical wounds faded, but more importantly, the invisible ones started to close. With every passing day, the fear that had been her constant companion was replaced by a burgeoning confidence. She was no longer the timid girl who had arrived in a cloud of dust and deceit. She had walked through fire and emerged stronger, with a clearer understanding of the world and of herself. Marcus was true to his word. He gave her space, but also unwavering support. She spent her days exploring the vast estate, not as a laborer, but as a guest. She rediscovered her love for botany, finding solace in the intricate patterns of leaves and the resilience of wildflowers that grew in the fields where she had once toiled. Marcus, too, was undergoing a transformation. He had successfully purged the poison of Silas from his company. He had implemented new policies, ensuring fair wages and ethical treatment for all the workers, many of whom now looked at him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. He was running his empire from this quiet corner of the world, finding more clarity and purpose here than he ever had in a high-rise boardroom. He had come here to find himself, but it was in the act of saving Ilara that he had truly succeeded. She had reminded him that the true measure of a person's worth had nothing to do with their title or their bank account. The day came for her to make a decision. Marcus sat with her on the same veranda where they'd had their first real conversation. "My team has secured you a full scholarship to the best botanical program in the country," he said gently. "A new apartment is waiting for you in the city. Everything is arranged. You can leave this place, and all its memories, behind you." He was offering her an escape, a return to civilization, the very thing she once would have craved. She looked out at the fields, now green and thriving under new, humane management. She thought of the wildflowers, pushing through the hard soil. She had done the same. "I don't want to go," she said, her voice clear and firm. Marcus looked at her, surprised. "What I learned here," she continued, "is that you don't run from the places that broke you. You heal them. This land, it's a part of my story now." She looked at him, her eyes shining with a new idea. "You wanted to reform this farm. Don't just make it a better business. Let's make it a sanctuary. A place where people who have been exploited, people like me, can come to work, to heal and to grow. Let's not just harvest crops. Let's harvest hope." A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. It was the most brilliant idea he had ever heard. In that moment, he saw her not as someone he had saved, but as a partner, a leader. Her resilience was the seed of a new and beautiful purpose for them both. The final lesson of their story was clear. True power isn't about what you own, but what you build. True strength isn't about avoiding pain, but about transforming it into something that can heal others. And the richest harvests often come from the most broken ground. Together, they would create a place where every person was valued, not for the work their hands could do, but for the untamable strength of their spirit. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful life lessons every week.